I'd like to welcome everyone. Thank you for joining this MDOT webinar. We are just so fortunate to have Dr. Ed Ramos. He's a dear friend. I've known him for a while by now. I largely know him. I was introduced to him when he became the program officer for our MD2K Center of Excellence. At that point, he was at NIH in the NIBIB. Then he moved to the All of Us program, and now he is at a joint appointment with Scripps and Care Evolution. He is a co-founder of the Digital Trial Center. We marvel when we are able to, or we get excited when we are able to run trials with few hundred people with wearable devices. And when I heard him talk about the number of people that they had with a variety of wearable devices doing that COVID study, that's what is the scale that we only aspire to reach. So I would love to hear his take on how he does or he thinks about the digital clinical trials. Before he went to NIH, he was a legislative fellow and was advising then U.S. Senator Barack Obama before he became president on health and science policy. So it feels like we're just so lucky to get to know him and to hear from him. And the topic that he's speaking on today is very near and dear to my heart. We moved from MD2K Center of Excellence to the MDOT Center, where we moved from observation to intervention, and that's precisely what he's going to talk about as to how to think about moving from beyond observation to intervention in the digital clinical trials. And that's what we need in order to have the health impact that we all aspire to from our respective work, whether in the computational side or on the health side. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Ramos and hear his wonderful ideas. In terms
Fantastic.
of the format, please hold off your questions. We will open the floor for questions in the last 10 to 15 minutes. And until then, please allow uninterrupted time to Dr. Ramos. Thank you.
Thank you, Santosh. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. Well, the pleasure is shared here, Santosh. It's been amazing building our professional relationship as well as our friendship. Really appreciate MDOT extending the invitation to talk a little bit about what we've done. I'll do a little bit of an extended background for me professionally, just to give you a sense of how I've evolved to where I am now in the digital health, digital medicine space, but also give a bit of a primer on what our philosophies are that feed into the Digital Trial Center at Scripps and how we leverage the relationship with Care Evolution and my position there. So I'll just step into, in terms of undergrad, my passion has been, and I think will always be, in the biomedical science space. My degree at Penn State was in biochemistry and molecular biology, rooted, at least initially, in yeast genetics. Went on to grad school after really searching for a program that was able to combine computer science and biomedical science. And so the molecular biotechnology department, which at the time was one of the first kind of interdisciplinary efforts for a grad school PhD program, was launched at the University of Washington. So I moved out to Seattle and spent several years there, almost climbing the evolutionary ladder in terms of species, where I started working in the immune system with mice, and then moved on to tissue culture. And then I recognized during grad school this amazing additional layer that went on with science with regards to policy and what did impact really mean beyond the bench. And so I started doing more and more that was available to me as a grad student, sitting on different types of panels that focus more on what does participant-centered, user-centered design mean? How do we get input from the general public with regards to science and clinical trials? And it grew from an interest to a passion, and really something that I knew I wanted to incorporate moving forward. So as Santosh mentioned, I was fortunate to have this opportunity through a genomics and public policy fellowship that brought me to Capitol Hill in DC, where I learned more on the general aspects of public policy, and then really brought that to bear within the National Institutes of Health, initially running my own independent research in the population genomics space, but always kind of keeping a handle on the public health policies that were associated. And at the time, quite a few. It was really the emergence of ethical, legal, and social implications of genetics and genomics as the human genome was sequenced, and really starting to get deeper and deeper into privacy and what that meant with regards to data collection. And then the kind of area where I focused on really overlapped quite a bit with bioinformatics. And that grew into data science and really drew me to the National Institute for Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering, which allowed me to cut my teeth in the digital health space, in the mobile health space, to work with amazing innovators like Santosh and many of you on the call, all of you on the call, with regards to different types of contributions to the public health space, but through a digital medicine, digital health lens. I then really found an amazing opportunity still at the NIH, but within the Office of the Director, excuse me, where we launched the All of Us Research Program, which is one of NIH's boldest research efforts to recruit 1 million or more individuals over a long period of time, and hopefully multi-generational, really under this umbrella of precision medicine. So at that point, very much agnostic in terms of disease or disorder, as it kind of fit under this umbrella of precision medicine with regards to what are the different types of data that we can now ingest and analyze? How do we give that information back to participants? And it really was a culmination of everything that I had been weaving myself in and out of professionally, in terms of being rooted in the biomedical science, learning more about the digital health space, understanding the policies that kind of surrounded all of these different activities. And so the next step really was yet another evolutionary point for me with regards to being able to build out the Digital Clinical Trial Center and working with the amazing team at Care Evolution with regards to the technology platform that supports so much of what we do. And I'll give a little bit more detail into that as well. So hopefully that's a helpful introduction, not only to get to know me, but just to kind of get to know where my brain is and how I've come to enter into this space, with really one of the more poignant questions listed here in terms of, well, what exactly is the promise of decentralized digital trials? What are the problems that we're trying to solve? What are the friction points? Do things need to change, and do some things need to stay the same? So the space of decentralized or digital clinical trials, certainly not synonymous, but they overlap significantly. And I always love showing this snapshot, as COVID-19 really provided an accelerant in the field with regards to how do we continue doing business as usual, certainly at the start of the COVID pandemic, in terms of not being able to bring participants into a brick and mortar facility. How do we continue to do our science that kind of relies on that type of infrastructure? And so this was literally an article that was listed in the unintended consequences section of the New York Times back in February of 2021, where it really started to highlight the need for moving clinical trials out of the lab and decentralizing them such that we can continue to contribute as participants from the general public from the comfort of our own homes. And so I smile a bit at this having worked now with the Scripps research team in terms of all the things that they have done in this space prior to COVID. And so we were able to enter into the pandemic quite ready, because on the next few slides here, I'll indicate some pain points that the team has been thinking about, not only from a research perspective, but also from a technology perspective on the care evolution side, really being at the ready with tools to support this new paradigm shift. So reducing the burden of participation obviously is front and center, where typically if you're thinking about a traditional design in which you need to bring participants to a center, to a brick and mortar facility, to a clinic, then there are considerations that need to be made with regards to transportation. Then there is potential limitations in the cohort that you're building with regards to likely being relegated to a specific patient population. So do your research questions even match the patient populations that you have access to, which oftentimes don't necessarily align? Obviously, you need a boots on the ground study coordinator team to really provide that high touch experience to participants, to onboard them, to step them through consent and all the different research clinical trial tasks. And then, of course, there are more specific operational things like on-site biospecimen collection, whether it's blood or urine or stool or saliva. And then, of course, having the trained professionals to collect all of that information. The in-person enrollment can take a significant amount of time. And so you're talking about one-on-one conversations, really almost hand-to-hand combat in terms of outreach and then recruiting and enrolling and onboarding individuals in the study. So the kind of decentralized model then called for, well, what can potentially either substitute or serve as a proxy or loosen some of these bottlenecks and potential pain points. And the digital study design, hopefully I'll be able to convince you and show some examples of how we can still deliver a meaningful experience to participants and really still keep them engaged, and in some cases, potentially more engaged with regards to participating in a clinical trial. So that's the pain points of just getting them through the door, getting them into the building, getting them into the study. And then there's design around, well, what are our limitations in terms of collecting data? So if you're asking a participant to come to a brick and mortar facility, then you're potentially limiting the amount of data, potentially the type of data, certainly removing the contextual aspect of really being able to collect real world evidence, in which where you have a digital clinical research study that's decentralized, excuse me, that can leverage a variety of different digital health technologies that are out there. And you have a full spectrum here in terms of consumer grade, off the shelf sensors and wearables to FDA approved devices, depending on the type of data that you're collecting and the intention of the data in terms of use and analysis. So we have the opportunity to use anything from a Fitbit to a Dexcom G6 to other potential digital therapeutics that are FDA approved, as well as just even the features and functionalities that come along with a smartphone and come along with a robust technology platform that can use logical triggers and ingest enough contextual information in such a way that the notifications and the reminders are triggered and deployed at the appropriate time. So that's getting them through the door, that's collecting their information, and then there's the dissemination of findings. And so this is where I think there can be a significant separation in terms of the limitations and the challenges of a traditional model versus something that's built out in a digital fashion. So again, very much generalizing here, that will be the primary caveat, but I'm sure many of us are familiar with the model of multi-year in terms of that initial enrollment, ending the study, collecting all the data, analyzing all the data, identifying what your outcomes are, and then pushing them through the peer-reviewed process to ultimately disseminate them through a publication. And those publications are likely very abstract to the participant in terms of, well, what does my data that I shared actually really mean with regards to the outcomes that you're discussing in this paper. We certainly do them very, very specifically in a manner in which identifiers are removed. So we try to make this as anonymous as possible. But then you lose the connection with the participant in terms of, well, what does my specific data actually mean in this context? So the digital model can allow for, of the information that we're collecting, not only presenting them to them for the purposes of being transparent, but also delivering it back to them such that there is an opportunity for building out some level of health insights. And being able to do this in a timely fashion, in a potentially near real-time fashion, which is exciting and an area that I like to play with quite a bit. And that really is germane to the topic of this talk in terms of, well, what does that shift from observational to interventional really mean in a digital clinical research design? And so finally, in terms of access, as I mentioned, typically relegated to a patient population, how far can you go in really understanding the individual motivations? How can you test the value proposition to ensure that you're motivating as many individuals as possible to participate in your research study? And are the limitations such that you really aren't being able to deliver a delightful, quote unquote, experience to the participant? So when you kind of release the boundaries, at least geographically, and you really kind of come into this anyone, anywhere model, you're able to scale at a much rapid pace. You're able to do that A/B testing, as it's referred to, in terms of understanding what messaging and how to communicate with different subpopulations that potentially make up your cohort. And again, all of this is towards recognizing that a participant is volunteering for this, and they want to have an understanding of not only, certainly there's an altruistic component to it in terms of volunteering time, but also many of our participants come to us with questions of their own. What does this mean for my health? What does this mean for the future of my health? What does this data potentially speak to in terms of the generations behind me? And so the opportunity to really broaden out that participant cohort base is a priority for us as well. So again, hopefully gives a sense of our perspective at Scripps Research, and I'm sure you're starting to kind of build in your mind a picture of how the technology can then support a lot of this. And this really comes together for us at the Digital Trial Center. So I'm listing in here my co-founder, Katie Bakamotes, where we built out the Digital Trial Center within Scripps Research with a significant amount of thought, input, and investment from Dick Ketterpaul, the principal at Care Evolution, really trying to summarize here in terms of leveraging all of these amazing new technologies to rethink and re-engineer and kind of flip the model of the traditional clinical trial on its head, to focus it around the participant. And hopefully much of the pain points that I pointed out are really around making this a more joyful experience for the participant, rather than the convenience of just having this at a particular research site for the research team. And so again, this kind of circling back to the unintended consequences article in 2021, the Scripps Digital Medicine team led by Eric Topol, who has really kind of pioneered the space of digital medicine, has really had their foot in this area for quite some time, whether it was the more recent All of Us research program, or one of the first digital clinical trials, MSTOPS, that kind of focused on the AFib space and leveraging different types of sensors in an anyone, anywhere type of model. And so all of this culminated for us at Scripps Research, and I'll just kind of end in terms of the primer part of the presentation to really kind of show you how I continue thinking about the technology aspects and the additional expertise that can be overlaid on this. So again, just kind of summarizing here in terms of, limited to a patient population, but building out that digital experience can potentially break some of those barriers. Being relegated to a brick and mortar facility, being able to do things on your smartphone can now move that experience to the comfort of your own home. That one-to-one interaction, needing boots on the ground, and can potentially be substituted by a app-based experience in which many of the tasks, if not all of them, are self-guided. And then we've come across instances in which, oh my gosh, well, what about biosample collection? How do we coordinate that? All of this can be done on a robust platform that allows for that type of logistics coordination. And then, of course, the types of sensors, that list continues to explode and expand with regards to the different digital biomarkers that can now be collected and shared. But of course, you need the appropriate plumbing and to be able to ingest, analyze, and when appropriate, push that back out to participants as it makes sense. So shifting from technology, not really shifting, but adding on top of that layer of a robust platform, the Digital Trial Center then kind of really speaks to, well, what exactly is anyone, anywhere? How do we push the envelopes in terms of the different populations? We start getting into issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and get excited about expanding representation through this model that really can potentially improve access for underserved and underrepresented populations. It's been exciting for me, especially over the last few months, which has kind of been conference season, to go to DTRA or to health or to sit on digital medicine panels or CTTI. Almost every single, no, not almost, every single event that I've been a part of, there has been a very pointed and specific discussion around DEI and representation, and rightfully so, because I really don't think we're going to advance public health if we don't prioritize representation and recognize what barriers to access really mean in the long run with regards to future health innovations. The center, again, with regards to biosample collection, so it's not just being able to have a platform that can manage the logistics, but what exactly are those devices and sensors that we should be using? How do we validate them? Do we validate them ourselves? How do we build them into the workflows in a way that makes sense for the participant, that they can do them in a self-guided fashion? And that's true for the digital biomarkers as well. Getting heart rate from a Fitbit is different from an Apple Watch than it is from a Garmin, and an understanding of how to analyze, how to potentially standardize, how to normalize many of these different data types is an exciting area for the data science team within the Digital Trial Center as well, Scripps. So again, I've probably beaten to death this theme of how to bring technology and this layer of expertise that kind of puts the participant in the center. But that really has been what's been driving so many of our research platforms that I'm very excited to step through now, that kind of put some teeth into this understanding of and this drive towards observational and a shift to intervention. So just a snapshot here. I will focus on Detect, time allowing. I'll just kind of give some snippets of some of the other platforms that we've launched, but really want to give some concrete use cases in terms of how we've been able to apply a lot of these philosophies and concepts to a variety of different research agendas and topics. So as I mentioned, COVID-19 was the ultimate accelerant in this space, not only for being able to recognize the need to operate in a decentralized fashion, but also to move quickly and to try and identify as many findings as possible. So for us, DETECT was really a showcase of a nimble response that put many of the previous years of expertise to the test. Very coincidentally, the team had just published in the early part of 2020 some papers that were focused on examining the changes in resting heart rate as it related to influenza-like illness health outcomes. And we quickly recognized that there's an opportunity to pivot many of those strategies and approaches and apply them to the COVID-19 pandemic, given the similarities in certain instances of symptomatology. So from concept to nationwide launch, the team was able to push that out in just over a month. And within 3 months, thanks to a variety of different national partners, and obviously thanks to the motivation of the general public within a global pandemic, recognizing that there are a variety of different opportunities to contribute and to learn as much as possible, we were able to enroll over 35,000 participants in the first 4 months. That really kind of laid the groundwork for a significant amount of observational analyses. Where we're able to pull our primary digital biomarkers of interest, resting heart rate and sleep duration and physical activity, coupled with analysis of symptomatology capture, as well as time and duration of symptoms, has led to a plethora of publications from the team, really kind of looking at different aspects of analysis. So the first of those papers coming out just 7 months from launch, in which we described basically the relationship that we observed of those digital biomarkers and COVID-19 positivity rate. So all of this, this is just a snapshot of the philosophy here in terms of, as we were rolling out DETECT, we were also recognizing that this really could serve as a template for future studies, in that we wanted to build that initial research platform that has a very quick onboarding, low burden enrollment process for participants, where they're basically connecting their device and letting us know when they get sick. But on top of that, then we can build this very large cohort and potentially now deep dive on specific questions in a sub-study manner. And so we're starting to see elements of a model that could be served beyond just DETECT, beyond just COVID, in addition to what was driving us, this ability to really build out some of these novel algorithms that could potentially be returned back to the participant. And so just to get into specifics of that initial publication, we were able to establish a baseline for those different digital biomarkers that really led to a statistical model that could speak to an area under the curve analysis, where you compare symptom-only prediction of COVID-19 positivity to symptoms plus those digital biomarkers. And we were able to see a significant difference between the two, with an AUC of around 0.8 for that more improved model of being able to add digital biomarkers to symptom capture. And again, much of this we were piloting. We were really trying to get an understanding of pushing the envelope on these types of analyses. And it was just exciting for us to lay some of this initial groundwork that could potentially serve, again, as a model for future questions. The cohort, which obviously continued to contribute to sharing data, allowed for some longitudinal analysis as well. So the kind of general public sentiment, and I think in some cases, the biomedical community interest really started shifting, or at the very least added on, and a need for better understanding of what the long-term impacts of infection really meant. And so in the summer of last year, the team was able to look at some of that longitudinal data that they at that point then had, And we're able to show an increase in resting heart rate activity, as you would expect at onset of viral infection. And then as the body fights it off, it starts returning back down to baseline, in some cases in a brachycardia state, as the body begins to heal. And the expectation and the desire is really for it to go back to baseline and settle. But what the team was able to show is that that resting heart rate then went into more of a tachycardia profile and persisted out for on the order of 3 months, which at that point in time was the extent of the data set that we had for a significant analysis. And so amazing to me in terms of you thinking about just what a Fitbit or a similar wearable fitness tracker can contribute, and just exciting for us to see the potential here in being able to not only push the model of a decentralized clinical design, but really push the limits of the technology platform that we were leveraging, push the limits of our analyses, and really give us a foothold into being able to get a good understanding of how we can build out this observational data, but left us wanting more in terms of, well, what does the potential interventional space look like for this? So again, we really then shifted to testing the ability of a platform sub-study model. I've described the platform aspect of it, where it's almost a set it and forget it, a quick onboarding process, and you're alerted to let us know when you're feeling sick or when you've been vaccinated, or any other additional COVID-19 test results. But the sub-study, a sponsored sub-study that came and was presented to us was really, can we now use a lot of that statistical model information and feed that into a learned algorithm that could do individual level triggering of alerting the participant with regards to when their digital biomarker data started deviating from baseline, and then coupling that with an at-home COVID testing kit. And so now we're able to move from, and I will say it wasn't, one of the primary tenets that we incorporate for all of our research is really keeping an eye on this push and pull of data from participants. And with regards to Detect, you had built in a platform that if you connected your electronic health record data, there's a data visualization that presents all that information. So there's a significant amount of transparency that's shared between the participant and the study coordinator team. There's also a resting heart rate calendar that kind of gave the participant quick summary of the resting heart rate over a long period of time, so that they themselves can see the trends. And then if they in fact indicated that they had symptoms, the calendar would respond in kind in terms of identifying those particular days, and then you can kind of see whether or not your resting heart rate went up as something to provide with regards to a health insight. This sub-study provided a more significant return of information with regards to being very personalized and individualized, and this dichotomy of the technology and how you use the technology. Okay, it was great that we can develop this algorithm, that we had a robust technology that could deliver it based on back-end analyses. But then you have to think about, well, how are we actually delivering it to the participant? What are we actually saying? You don't want to scare the participant, but you want to drive them to some kind of specific action and activity. And this is really how we kind of have come to each of our challenges and problems in developing a variety of these different research platforms. So again, as I mentioned, that alert is then delivered to the participant. They were asked, 450 individuals that participated were asked then, depending on which intervention arm they had, to take a COVID-19 test, in which the test outcome was captured and they could provide symptom reporting. So is it interventional in the sense of you're delivering an injectable to a person? and testing out a new drug? No, not necessarily, but it is an evolution of how do you use that observational data in a meaningful way beyond just analyses, but really incorporating the participant in a more interventional type of design. I will note here, again, just as another feather in the cap of a decentralized digital study, that we were able to build out the protocol for the sub-study very quickly. And enrollment was 9.5 weeks from first participant in to last participant in. And I think what we're most proud of is not only being able to hit our goals of enrollment in such a short period of time, but also being able to hit our goals that we're focused on underrepresented in biomedical research, very specifically race and ethnicity, in which 30% of individuals consisted of a UBR race, self-reported race or ethnicity, and over half the cohort self-reported in one of the underrepresented in biomedical research categories, whether it was race or ethnicity, geographic area, socioeconomic status, education, and so we were excited to push the digital model to the test in the representation lens as well. So the kind of moving here, and I'm just keeping an eye on time because I do want to leave time for Q&A in the last few minutes. How do we continue to build out and evolve this observation and intervention space, potentially continuing to leverage the sub-study model? So one of our other research programs is focused on maternal health. We call it Power Mom. It's led by Dr. Lachey Ajayi as the PI, who is a power mom herself, and having given birth to her second child during COVID, and has just been an absolute leader for this particular project, where we similarly built out a platform, kind of lightweight foundational protocol in which we're collecting baseline biometrics, biweekly surveys that are relevant to the pregnancy experience and to maternal health in general, collection of demographics, and then ultimately on birth outcomes as well, with the ability for participants to connect their EHR data. The sub-study that we built out, which was also another sponsored sub-study, was then focused on, and you can imagine all the different specific types of questions that you could potentially ask in maternal health. Studying maternal health generally, to get on a soapbox for a second, in and of itself, would be a significant contribution, given the paucity of data that we have in this space and the significant health disparity that we have, especially in the Black pregnant person community, but even just comparatively of the United States to other industrialized nations in terms of where we are in maternal health. One area that we were able to focus on through a sponsored sub-study was on postpartum depression. So again, being able to leverage the existing cohort that we build up, and then being able to dive deep on a specific maternal health, in this case, related question. The interventional space comes with the tool that's actually being presented. So this is an FDA-approved chatbot guided assessment and therapeutic. And so the participant is guided within the Power Mom app to ensure eligibility, and they're pushed to this treatment arm of downloading this third-party software that then walks them through a postpartum depression assessment. And if they are assessed with having PPD, then they're presented with the digital therapeutic tool that is a part of that particular platform. So again, just tremendous excitement from our end of really being able to build out something and detect that has served as a significant template in a completely different space with regards to maternal health, but really kind of leveraging the core digital and decentralized tenets, as well as the kind of powered back-end robust platform that allows for this type of design. So I'll end kind of progressing here in terms of what we could potentially do down the road. So Refresh is our sleep medicine study. It's been exciting to build this out. Again, a very lightweight protocol that does an assessment for insomnia. There are a number of different validated survey instruments in the sleep medicine space that are presented to the participant, but also an opportunity now to ask a variety of different questions. So we're most excited in kind of really expanding the sleep medicine just baseline platform, as well as recognizing that there is a clear path to being able to leverage the Refresh platform for sub-studies in cognition, potentially in mental health, and those themselves could potentially be built out as standalone research platforms in the future. So this is a sub-study that the PI, Dr. Stuti Jaiswal, has received funding. She obviously helped in carving out the primary platform for Refresh, but is now interested in focusing on women's health and cognition, and really being able to assess longitudinally neurocognitive, different types of neurocognitive data variables that are collected during that time. And so we're on the heels of launching the Refresh platform and then building out this sub-study, and hopefully we'll put this out into the wild shortly. So just, again, to show something that we've completed versus something that's in progress versus something that is kind of downstream, but certainly queued up for the future, has just been a fun pipeline for all these different types of research contexts, leveraging a lot of what we've been able to establish through these different efforts. Progress is a little bit different. I actually happen to be the PI on this one. I always refer to it as the kitchen sink digital study, in which it shifts that platform sub-study model a bit with regards to going deep dive into a variety of different data types. And it's really motivated by ultimately doing multimodal analysis for the purpose of understanding glycemic response, especially in individuals without type 2 diabetes compared to pre-diabetics, compared to a potential progression to type 2 diabetes. This includes, and this is all self-guided, it's all motivated by the app, it's all decentralized, leveraging a variety of different digital health technologies for the collection of blood for HbA1c, confirmatory status, saliva for being able to run a polygenic risk score with regards to predisposition to type 2 diabetes. Microbiome is analyzed based on stool sample that is collected. A fitness tracker is provided to participants for that capture of digital biomarkers, and their nutritional intake is recorded during this very active 10-day data collection period, in which they're also wearing a Dexcom G6 monitor that provides real-time data collection of their blood sugar levels. And so this will be the last platform that I've discussed, and I think I'm going to end here with some time for Q&A. But you can start thinking about now what the potential interventional space is. So this has been super exciting in terms of being able to leverage the platform, the technology platform in this case, with regards to a very robust data visualization. So obviously there's a lot that we're throwing at the participant for them to do. There is a financial incentive that's appropriately kind of spaced out across the different tasks that we have them doing. But we also presented them with this unique novel data visualization in which we're taking the Dexcom G6 blood glucose values, delivering them in the same kind of real-time window, and overlaying the macronutritional information that the participant is also recording. And what we've seen and the feedback that we've received from participants is this almost seems to be the primary motivator, because folks get so interested in, oh my gosh, I just had a bagel, look how big I spiked, or I had a stack of pancakes and nothing happens, or what happens. And one of the number one requests that we get is for participants asking for another Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor sensor, so that they can, they really kind of get into this experimental mode of really getting a sense of what their body is doing in the space of glycemic response, as motivated by being able to interact with this data through the study app that we were able to build out. So again, I could give a talk on each one of these different parts of the pipeline, but we've really kind of been focused on this interventional outcome space. How can we leverage this really unique and amazing decentralized digital clinical study design in such a way that we can gather all of that amazing observational data and then make that shift into the interventional space and be able to do things which kind of fall under some of the examples that we gave in Detect to a variety of different just-in-time adaptive interventions, and really then start making that link to some really interesting and specific clinical endpoints that are tied to health outcomes. So hopefully I've been able to deliver a bit of our philosophy, our thinking, and hopefully generate some excitement around the work that we're doing, primarily because we very much practice open science, and we really want to position each of those platforms as opportunities for external collaborators to come in with their specific questions and build those sub-studies on top of what we had, because we have such a robust backend that allows for that type of flexibility. And we get excited at some of the amazing questions and approaches that our colleagues have. We certainly don't feel like we have all the questions and answers, and so being able to open this up more broadly is a big part of what we do as well. So with that, thank you so much. Really appreciate everyone's attention and excited to get into a bit of a discussion here.
Thank you so much, Ed. That was quite remarkable. Again, as I said, especially when we see the kind of numbers and the engagement and the rapid science that you have been able to do. So at this point, let's open the floor for questions. So Lindsay, do we receive questions over chat or over microphone?
People can just unmute themselves, and they can also raise their hand using the controls at the bottom if there's multiple questions.
So while people are thinking, let me start this off. So as you're presenting the rapid timeline that you're able to accomplish in launching the Detect study, many of us in the academia, it takes us years or at least many months to get things going and started and reach that level. So, and you have observed many of this firsthand. So what kind of resources or expertise helped you meet that timeline, and what lessons can you share for the rest of us to move or accelerate our pace for the trials?
Yeah, absolutely. And there will be continued lessons learned, I'm sure, in so many aspects as folks kind of recall that pipeline slide that I have. But I will point out a couple. So one is on the IRB side of things. So really socializing the decentralized digital clinical trial model is extremely important because your institution's IRB may potentially not have the expertise in terms of the composition of their board to really appreciate what the challenges, limitations, but also the opportunities are with leveraging digital health technologies, for example, or what it means to be quote unquote sightless. That's one of the biggest kind of conversation points that I have with colleagues with regards to how do I describe a sightless trial to an IRB that's used to us listing all of the different clinical sites for a study. So that is, I think, an important part to really begin that process early, even prior to having a protocol, just getting an understanding of what the IRB composition is in terms of the different members that they have, perhaps even suggesting certain individuals to be a part of the IRB. I've also started looking into what external IRB options there are. Obviously, that comes with the need for additional resources, but I will say some of the external centralized IRBs that I spoke with have purposely brought in individuals with that digital health, digital medicine background, because they're starting to see so many of these applications or protocol submissions come in that particular space. So I would say, just kind of thinking about this in the early parts of that pipeline, kind of giving that piece of advice as it's something that comes up quite a bit.
Thank you. Shaheen, I see you have a hand raised.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Ramos. This was a terrific presentation. I really appreciate you taking us through this high level in such a comprehensive way. And I was really interested to hear about the traditionally underrepresented populations, especially as it relates to the wearable health technologies and with respect to disparities that we know and that we've seen exist in research for so many years. I would just really love to know some of your strategies and or just observations of working with populations and leveraging these technologies in these traditionally underrepresented groups.
Yeah, easily could be a whole nother session for sure, but I'll try and hit some high points. So one is to a bit of a hat to FDA and kind of recognizing this and putting out their draft guidance with regards to the need for increased diversity, equity, and inclusion in the building of clinical trial cohorts. And I'll pick out one of the salient points that they indicated in the guidance was to really try to leverage data that focuses on populations associated with the disease of interest. So I think ultimately what they're trying to say is that if you're stepping into the type 2 diabetes space, there is a known health disparities component that is associated with that disease and disorder. And so there is a need to prioritize certain populations, and there is plenty of epidemiological data to support that. Just as a kind of thick carrot regulatory tidbit that to start off with. In terms of specific, this is the digital divide is a constant kind of thought topic for us. So one, less so on the smartphone side. I think we're starting to see a pretty ubiquitous use of smartphones. However, what remains is access to the internet and to high-speed internet in general. So that means then you need to focus on if your populations and subpopulations of interest, or to ensure that you're bringing in rural representation into the cohort, that those considerations need to be made as well. What are you going to do to mitigate potentially low access? Can you change, is this something that can be downloaded and done locally on the phone and then uploaded? Do they need that constant internet access? So there's a potential technology solutions that can be associated with that. And then there's other parts of this include just the complexity of the technology that you're asking participants to use. On that one, I will say, I don't think we give the general public enough credit. It's been kind of amazing to see, especially with the progress study that I mentioned. We're talking about touch-activated phlebotomy devices. Obviously, spitting in a tube is not that big of a deal, but connecting your continuous glucose monitor, being guided through the app, and our number one kind of interaction with participants are at the bottom of that list is, oh, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to connect, device X, or I got stuck on it's really has been less operational in that sense. That being said, that requires a significant amount of input from the participant, from the population as well. And so we leverage at Scripps Research a virtual advisory team, which is composed of a number of different stakeholders that are very much a good representation of participants that we bring into a lot of our studies. And their input is gold, from little things to, oh, that watch is ugly, I would never wear that thing, to, well, what happens if I eat at 2 o'clock in the morning because, I work, the graveyard shift, or, you get all of these tidbits that as a group, even a large group, you're just never going to be able to think of all these potential scenarios. And so they have been extremely valuable. And so I highly recommend putting together and assembling a similar type of team to always be there to serve as a sounding board for design. And that's really where you're able to start drifting into that user-centered, participant-centered design for a lot of your study protocols. And then the other is to what degree are demographics useful in your analysis? I think on the other end of the spectrum, we can slip very quickly to asking potentially too many questions at the end of which you use 1% of them. And so we try to balance that with, look, we're trying to reduce the burden of the participant, giving them a 30-minute survey to get an understanding of every single sub-demographic aspect may not make sense. In some cases it may, and then you have to think about how to break that down and deliver the appropriate experience. But I think we, you know, as much as a champion, and I will to the day I die, be evangelizing the need for DEI, we need to be smart about the questions that we're asking and recognize the context in which we're asking it. And I hope that helps.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Ed, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. We are nearing the end of time. To respect everyone's time, let's thank Ed for the amazing talk and generosity in sharing his amazing insights as well as experience. Very inspiring. I'm sure people on this call and those who view the webinar later on will greatly appreciate. Thank you so much, Ed.
Fantastic. Thank you all. Appreciate the attention.